Myles Turner leaving the Indiana Pacers for the Milwaukee Bucks. That's what we're talking about tonight with Tony East. He's the host of Locked On Pacers. Tony, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. A shocking day, to say the least, for the Pacers, who their most important free agent of the offseason is headed to a division rival.
Yeah, what did you think when you first heard this news?
Exactly that, really. Just that it's so shocking to see not only that a player that it made so much sense for them to keep, even after an up and down postseason. He's been a franchise pillar for 10 years, Myles Turner has. Not only is he leaving on terms that I think would have been potentially acceptable for the Pacers to have signed him to, he's heading to perhaps their biggest rival in the league right now, a team they've eliminated 2 years in a row in the first round, that they've had so many skirmishes with in this Milwaukee group. And now Myles Turner is there. They'll have to face him 4 times a year. Has to be painful for the Pacers, not only to lose an important player who fits well with both of their current stars, but also to lose him to a team that will now be very good with him on that roster.
So, Tony, reportedly Myles is going to get a 4-year deal worth $107 million. Why didn't the Pacers sign him?
Yeah, they have a lot of financial things to consider right now. It would have been simple for them to pay more for this roster had they known that the coming season they'd have a chance to be just as good as last year, be a finals contender again. But with Tyrese Haliburton went down in that Game 7, all of a sudden they have to think about how much they're willing to spend for this team and how much they're willing to spend for future teams when it comes to things like the luxury tax and the aprons that have been added as rules in this new NBA financial environment. And Myles Turner's contract was a big consideration for that this offseason, and it would have been the entire time they were paying him and anybody else. Once Haliburton went down, they surely had to reassess how much they'd be willing to spend for their team this year with such a lowered ceiling without him, and what that meant for their future spending as well, especially at that center position. Other guys will be free agents in coming seasons, but I think that the biggest signal that this shows is they may not have been willing to go all the way up to that 4 for 107 number that the Bucks were willing to offer, especially when you include that Myles Turner gets a player option, so he could potentially be a free agent and get back on the market sooner if he plays well for Milwaukee. And he gets a trade bonus with them, meaning if the Bucks ever trade him, he gets paid even more. That's a lot of bells and whistles on an already fairly nice contract for him. I think that would have been tough for the Pacers to do because they might have had to move other players off of their team in order to get their salaries where they wanted it if they did that. I think that would be the reason that they would call the leading purposes that he's not on their roster right now.
Tony, help our viewers understand the salary cap in the NBA and the luxury tax and how that may have played a role in this big news today.
Yeah, we could go till the morning news starts if I wanted to on this. But, they have a salary cap in the NBA, but it's a very soft salary cap. The league has a lot of rules to help players get paid or help teams keep their own players with lots of mechanisms. And I think that's a good thing in terms of helping teams grow and helping fans connect with their players. But they also have a lot now, more rules at the top of the spending thresholds these teams can hit. They have a new collecting of bargaining agreement that came out very recently, 2023, that tries to make it so there's more, penalties, for lack of a better term, for the teams that spend at the absolute highest level, well past the luxury tax, into these things they call the first and second apron. And so while teams can go well over the salary cap, they do become de-incentivized to being a certain level of expensive. And so in this situation, the Pacers, by having Myles Turner for so long, had certain mechanisms, in this case called bird rights, named after one Larry Bird, to sign Myles Turner to any legal contract that they could have. However, they would have pushed themselves over certain thresholds of spending that would have made certain other transactions more punitive and challenging in the future. And that's why this wasn't just as simple as, Myles, what do you want? Here's a blank check. They actually had to negotiate, and it appears that went well for the Bucks and not the Pacers.
So, Tony, I think a big question right now is who's going to play center for the Pacers next season? I mean, is there anyone on the current roster or any other free agents out there?
Yeah, that's the challenging part, is a lot of the best center free agents have already signed. The first day of free agency happened, and that's a tricky part of this. DeAndre Ayton, who the Pacers did sign as a restricted free agent a few years ago, he was recently bought out by his former team. He's available. He's probably the best available free agent right this second. After him, it's a lot of guys who either are older and are well past their prime or have very little, if no, starting level experience. Internally, all the Pacers centers from last year who played at least some besides Myles Turner are still out there. Isaiah Jackson, their young draft pick from a few years ago, they have as a restricted free agent. Thomas Bryant is still a free agent. Tony Bradley, they picked up his team option a couple days ago. He's technically on their roster right this second. James Wiseman's been rehabbing in Indy after he also tore his Achilles early in the season. And so some of those guys could be in the mix. We know the Pacers like them because they signed them before. But, how much that their dynamics have changed with Haliburton's injury and how much they're willing to spend could change how much they like having those players back for another spin.
I mean, certainly there's a long way to go before we get to next season. But as of tonight, who would be the starting five for the Pacers if they had a game?
Yeah, right now, I think three of their final starters who are still around, Pascal Siakam, Aaron Nesmith, and Andrew Nembhard would start. After that, I think it'd be Rick Carlisle making some choices. Benedict Mathurin started the second half after Tyrese Haliburton went down. I think next year with that lower ceiling, they might focus more on development and give Mathurin some more reps with that starting five. Perhaps they turn to Ben Shepherd as that fifth starter, as they've done at times when Haliburton's been out before. And at center, Tony Bradley's the only one on the team. He was playing minutes in the finals. He certainly has NBA-level rebounding, but there's a reason he wasn't on a roster as recently as March 1st. He's right on the fringes of, the NBA's ability level. So it's hard to say that he'll be their starting five on opening night, even if he is on the team. And they certainly have questions between Mathurin and Shepherd and some others for who else could start at that guard spot that Haliburton leaves vacant.
So going back to the NBA draft, when the Pacers had their first two choices, they chose guard and then another guard. Do you think that now, knowing that Myles Turner is gone, that they maybe look at those draft picks and think, oh, had I known that, maybe we would have drafted a big man instead?
It certainly makes you wonder. In fact, when the draft happened, when they didn't pick a center, it made me think, oh, they're confident, right, that they'll have Myles Turner or perhaps a center rotation that they like back on their team. And they pick Cam Jones and Taylen Peter, two guards, and they certainly need guards with Haliburton out and some of their other younger guards changing roles right now. But I certainly wonder if they would have different considerations or strengths or priorities heading back if they did the draft again, because again, now it's very hard for them to add meaningfully talented centers in both the short or long term, and that's going to be their biggest position of need for probably the next 2 years before Haliburton returns to the floor.
Yeah, I think a lot of Pacer fans were concerned that the team wouldn't be obviously the same with Haliburton missing all of next season with the torn Achilles. Now that Myles Turner isn't going to be there, what are we to think about what this Pacers team might look like next season?
It's going to be fascinating to see what they want to prioritize, because it will be very tempting for fans or for analysts outside to call this a gap year. I'll use that term that a lot of people have discussed with sports. The Celtics lost Jason Tatum. The Bucks, where Myles Turner's going, lost Damian Lillard to Achilles tears as well. And they've kind of discussed that gap year term for those teams too, where you try to, I guess, win with the resources you have, but you also maybe prioritize giving your young guys some time. And if you happen to, not have a great record and you get a better draft pick, that ends up being fine, because it's very clear your top end ceiling, if you're the Pacers, is not there anymore. But with Pascal Siakam and Aaron Nesmith and Andrew Nembhard and lots of other talented players, they're too good to truly just go into development mode the whole season and, win 25 games or whatever and try to get the top draft pick. So I think next year's going to be seeing what they can develop of their better players who will still be around when Tyrese Haliburton returns. Can they get new skills enabled for guys like Nembhard and Nesmith and Mathurin that make them better players when Tyrese Haliburton does return for this Pacers team?
All right, Tony East, the host of Locked On Pacers. This is a really good podcast. If you're a Pacer fan, you ought to be listening, because Tony really knows his stuff. Thanks so much again for joining us to talk about this big Pacer news today, Tony.
Thank you, Scott.